Hello and welcome to Let's Review. A couple of weeks ago, I looked at Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, a trippy little game about a murder-themed high school. And, well, now it's time to go back to school. Sort of. Because this time, rather than being set in a school, it's actually set on a murderous school trip on a tropical beach resort. Yeah, there is something seriously wrong with the makers of these games. Either way, shall we just start with the gameplay? The gameplay of Danganronpa 2 is very similar to the gameplay of Danganronpa 1. There's a little bit of exploration of the island, but mostly it's limited to clicking on various things in order to advance the plot, find clues, and talk to people. And ultimately, that's perfectly fine, but it's obviously not going to sell the game on its own. There's also been a few changes to the trials section, with new minigames added and the minigames that were there before tweaked. And honestly, I think it's for the worse. In the previous game, I found these minigames to be functional, but kind of tedious, and in this one I started to get really irritated by them. There was one in particular that I just found incredibly frustrating because I had to look the answer up to, because it was so surreal that you would not have been able to guess it very easily. If you did guess it, well done to you, you're smarter than I am. Honestly, I don't think these games need the minigames, because all it does is distract me from what I actually want to be doing, which is solving the mystery. Now, I appreciate there's a fine balance between doing everything for the player in that regard and giving them too much freedom, but honestly, I think this slides too far in the wrong direction. Ultimately, the gameplay is not what's going to sell this game to you, but if you're expecting that, you're probably looking at the wrong title. That, of course, naturally leads us on to the story. In all honesty, I'm not actually sure if this game is a reboot, a sequel, or possibly some sort of alternate universe what-if story. Regardless, it's largely independent of the first one, so you don't really need to have played it, although you'll certainly notice things if you have played the first one. Here, a fresh group of students arrive at Hope's Peak Academy, ready to begin their school careers, only to fall unconscious and awake on a tropical paradise island, where a bunny rabbit tells them that they all need to be nice to each other and get along. That sounds rather tedious. Yeah, it is, but that's just the prologue. It ends when our favourite psycho teddy bear, Monokuma, turns up, beats up the rabbit, and takes over the island, declaring that you all have to start murdering each other. Because that's just what he does. The rules for the contest are exactly the same as before, and as a result this game does feel very similar to the first. Would you also be complaining if it was too different? Yes, I would. I freely admit threading that particular needle is very tricky, and I think this game plays it just a little bit too safe as a sequel. As before, the rules of the contest are very simple. If you want to leave the island, you have to commit a murder. However, once a murder has been committed, a class trial will happen, in which everyone currently surviving will attempt to figure out who the murderer was. If they get it right, the murderer is executed. If they get it wrong, everybody except the murderer is executed, and the murderer gets to leave. It's still an interesting idea, to be fair. Oh, I wouldn't deny that, and the mysteries presented here are reasonably interesting with some fun solutions. However, it feels like there's a few more leaps in logic this time. In the first game, I was usually able to come up with a reasonably sensible working theory going into each trial, that while not necessarily completely accurate, usually had an awful lot of accuracies to it. Here, it feels like I have to find out the big reveals from each trial before I actually understand what the hell is going on even slightly. Is that not the point of the trial? Yes, but it's also less fun. For the simple reason that while the whole point of the trial is to reveal things to you, it feels like you don't have all the clues to actually solve the mystery yourself. And as a result, it feels less like you are solving the mystery, and more like you are watching somebody else solve it for you. Which to me is just way less interesting. Don't people watch detective shows and crime procedurals largely in order to watch people solving mysteries? Yes, but I am not one of those people. The new cast is fine. There's a couple of interesting people, and most of them are pretty decent. Though I will freely admit that Gundam Tanaka is just fabulous. Seriously, if that hamster-breeding lunatic ever manages to actually take over the world, I will support him to the hilt. He's wonderful. Monokuma is still an annoying prick, but, well, I suppose that is his gimmick. Well, he is the villain, after all. True. Danganronpa 2 ultimately is more Danganronpa. And if that's all you wanted, you'll be satisfied with the story, but for whatever reason, it just didn't click with me anywhere near as well as the first one, and I'm genuinely unsure why. For what it's worth, though, I did enjoy the story, but it definitely has its issues. The art for this game is very, very similar to the first game. I suspect the same art team, or possibly even the same artist, worked on it. And ultimately that means it continues to feel very, very similar to the first. It's got a few more over-the-top anime tropes at times, but that's usually when Monokuma and the rabbit Monami have a punch-up. And ultimately I don't mind it too much, even though I've never been a fan of that kind of hyper-stylized artwork. Ultimately, I'm perfectly happy to say the artwork is fine, and it should also be noted that it's still using that slightly strange thing of purple blood, but I'm assuming that's once again probably an age rating thing. So overall, I'm perfectly happy to say that the art is pretty good. Likewise, the audio is perfectly fine. The music's pretty decent, the sound effects are functional, and the voice acting is pretty good, although once again it's limited to the trials and to specific important events. And again, that's kind of annoying because I'm an all or nothing kind of guy when it comes to voice acting. I don't mind them having voice acting or not. I've just never been a fan of this, bit but not all the time kind of style. It's just annoying to me. But ultimately though, the audio is basically exactly the same as the first, and it's still fine. So, did I enjoy Danganronpa 2? Goodbye Despair? For the most part, yes. Should you buy it? Ultimately, Danganronpa 2 is more Danganronpa. And if that's all you wanted, you'll be very satisfied with this. But personally, I was hoping for a little bit more. It doesn't do enough to expand on what's come before as a sequel should, and it merely repeats elements that we've already seen, which means that while it's still a solid, enjoyable experience, it feels like there could have been more. Now, if you'll excuse me, I haven't actually cleaned Annie in like a month or so. I ought to get round to doing that. I'll see you later. You know, there is something very Freudian about that. Blade care is important, as you well know. Besides, what exactly do you think is Freudian about carefully applying lubricant to one's own sword? How's your own project been going? Not well. Turns out trying to design an anti-intruder system is harder than you would think. I've come up with one that should deliver a rather effective blast of ice to anyone attempting to effect entry. So what's the problem? I suspect the postman would object to a sudden bout of frostbite. I haven't found a way to make it distinguish between targets yet. Yeah, okay, that's a problem. Anything I can do to help? Not unless you've taken a course in magical wards and forgotten to mention it. Can't say that I have. Admittedly, I have no idea how you managed to get your head around all that magic stuff. To me, it's just Weird. Oh, it's not really that complicated. Well, not once you wrap your mind around the fact that it not making sense is the part that makes it make sense, at any rate. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave the metaphysical stuff to you and focus on, stabbing things. That's probably for the best. Nah, I'll figure it out eventually. Tell you what, just give me a call if you need me for anything. Well,